In the early 13th century, the Mongol Empire expanded across the Eurasian steppe with unprecedented speed. What began under Genghis Khan around 1206 quickly became the largest land empire in human history. No fortified walls stopped the Mongols, and no standing army matched their mobility. Speed, coordination, and relentless movement defined how Mongol power worked. From northern China to Eastern Europe, Mongol authority stretched across continents within decades. The empire appeared not just powerful, but structurally unstoppable. At its height, Mongol power did not rely on cities or permanent capitals. Authority moved with commanders on horseback, adapting faster than any settled empire could respond. Yet less than a century after its greatest expansion, that unity was gone. The empire still existed, but it no longer moved as one. The mystery is not how the Mongols conquered so much territory so quickly. The real question is why a system that powerful could not stay together. Mongol power was built around constant motion rather than permanent control. Speed was not just a military advantage, but the foundation of how authority functioned. Life on the steppe shaped every aspect of Mongol organization. Logistics, communication, and command all depended on mobility rather than fixed infrastructure. Unlike settled empires, Mongol authority did not center on cities or capitals. Power traveled with commanders, shifting location as the army moved. This system rewarded adaptability over permanence. Control remained flexible, responsive, and difficult for opponents to predict. As long as the empire kept moving outward, the system stayed coherent. Expansion synchronized ambition, loyalty, and command into a single direction. Movement reduced internal friction by providing constant opportunity. Success on the frontier prevented rivalry at the center. The Mongol Empire functioned best while it was advancing across new territory. Stability was never the objective. Momentum was the organizing principle. Expansion generated land, wealth, and authority at the same time. Every successful campaign reinforced loyalty by producing tangible rewards. Victories created resources that could be redistributed among commanders and elite families. This circulation of reward kept internal competition under control. Ambition flowed outward instead of inward as long as expansion continued. The frontier absorbed rivalry that might otherwise fracture authority. Expansion also simplified decision-making across the empire. Clear objectives kept authority focused forward instead of divided internally. As long as new territory remained available, political balance held. The system stayed aligned because growth never stopped. But expansion was not infinite. Once growth slowed, the same forces that created unity began to pull the system apart. Mongol power was inherited through lineage rather than fixed institutions. Authority passed within the ruling family, not through a permanent state structure. Succession depended on agreement among powerful relatives and commanders. Leadership required consensus, not automatic transfer. This system worked when the empire was small and expanding. Scale turned consensus into delay and uncertainty. Each transition of power reopened fundamental questions of authority. Expansion temporarily masked these tensions by keeping elites focused outward. As the empire grew larger, coordination without institutions became increasingly fragile. Personal loyalty could not scale indefinitely. Every succession introduced friction into a system designed for motion, not stability. Without expansion, that friction had nowhere to go. The empire required continuity, but its structure produced recurring uncertainty. Over time, succession became a structural weakness rather than a temporary challenge. By the mid to late 13th century, Mongol expansion began to slow across multiple fronts. The empire encountered geographic limits, resistance, and diminishing returns. There was no single moment when expansion stopped completely. Instead, opportunities for easy conquest gradually disappeared. As growth slowed, rewards became finite. Land, tribute, and authority could no longer expand fast enough to satisfy competing elites. Without new territory to distribute, competition turned inward. Ambition that once fueled conquest now strained internal balance. Authority fractured as regional leaders asserted greater autonomy. Control weakened not from defeat, but from redistribution of power. The system that depended on constant motion now faced stagnation. Movement without expansion produced friction instead of unity. What had once held the empire together began to pull it apart. Expansion no longer resolved tension. It exposed it. As expansion slowed and succession disputes intensified, internal conflicts began to surface. These confrontations were not sudden failures, but the release of long-contained pressure. What followed were limited civil conflicts rather than a single empire-wide war. Military strength remained high, but unity of command weakened. The most visible fracture emerged during the Toluid Civil War between 1260 and 1264. Rival claimants contested leadership, formalizing divisions that already existed. This conflict did not destroy Mongol military capability. It destroyed the idea of a single, uncontested center of authority. From this point forward, coordination became optional rather than enforced. Regional leaders answered to local priorities instead of imperial command. Civil war was not the cause of collapse across the Mongol Empire. It was the moment when the system's structural limits became impossible to ignore. After the civil conflicts, the Mongol Empire no longer functioned as a single political system. Authority fractured into multiple regional centers with independent control. These regions evolved into distinct khanates, each responding to local conditions and priorities. Shared command was replaced by parallel systems of rule. Geographic distance reinforced political separation. Communication across the empire slowed, weakening coordination further. Local rulers gained autonomy as imperial authority became symbolic rather than operational. Power remained strong regionally, but coherence disappeared. The empire still existed in name, but not in function. What remained was a network of powerful states rather than a unified empire. Each khanate pursued stability on its own terms after fragmentation. Cooperation existed, but it depended on circumstance rather than shared authority. Fragmentation did not erase Mongol power across Eurasia. It reshaped that power into regional forces that could no longer be brought back together. Once fragmentation set in, reunifying the empire required structures that did not exist. The Mongol system had never been designed for centralized recovery. Nomadic political authority worked through personal bonds rather than permanent institutions. Those bonds weakened as distance and autonomy increased. Each khanate developed interests that no longer aligned with imperial unity. Stability at the regional level reduced incentives to restore central control. Reunification would have required limiting local power. Few leaders were willing to surrender authority they already possessed. Military strength persisted across the former Mongol Empire. What disappeared was the coordinating system that once unified those forces under a single command. Without coordination, power could not be consolidated again. The system transitioned permanently from unity to legacy. The Mongols did not lose power because they were defeated in a decisive battle. They lost power when coordination across the empire stopped functioning. Control disappeared before strength did across the Mongol domains. Forces remained capable, but they no longer moved with a single shared purpose. What collapsed was not Mongol capability, but the system that aligned it. Expansion had once synchronized ambition, authority, and movement. When expansion no longer held the system together, fragmentation became permanent. Power continued, but unity did not. This is what the fall of the Mongol Empire actually means. Not collapse through defeat, but loss of a structure that could no longer hold. The Mongol Empire reveals how systems built for speed can outrun their own structure. What makes rapid expansion possible can also make long-term stability impossible. Power can grow faster than the systems meant to hold it together. When that happens, Strength remains while coherence quietly disappears. The Mongols did not lose power because they were conquered. They lost power because an empire built to move could not survive standing still.